The structure of a protein is really important and usually determines its function. So change to a structure, any structural change to a protein will have effects on its function. One really good example of how structure relates to function is sickle cell anemia. So just a small change in the primary structure, which is the amino acid sequence, just a small change, a single amino acid change has dramatic effects on red blood cells and leads to a disease called sickle cell anemia. Sickle cell anemia is an example of a change in just one amino acid, and this could result from just one nucleotide base difference in the DNA code. Because a different triplet codon would be brought in with the wrong amino acid. Hemoglobin is what carries oxygen in the blood. And the structure of hemoglobin, this is the quaternary structure because there are 4 polypeptide chains, each with its 3-dimensional shape. One single polypeptide has its 3-dimensional structure, and that's the example of myoglobin. What's important is that the hemoglobin and myoglobin have this function of carrying oxygen, and how the oxygen is carried is by the specific shape. There's a little pocket in this 3-dimensional shape that fits a heme group, that's this yellow disc, and that heme group attaches an oxygen molecule. We can have 4 oxygen molecules attached to hemoglobin and 1 oxygen attached to myoglobin. What happens when there's one amino acid change is a change in the structure of this active site where the heme group is. When hemoglobin has a change in this one amino acid, it causes an altered structure of the hemoglobin molecule. It is not the normal shape, and these tend to clump up. These hemoglobin molecules will clump up. And when they clump up, and when those hemoglobins clump up, they clump up inside of red blood cells. So red blood cells contain the hemoglobin proteins that carry the oxygen, and red blood cells carry oxygen in the blood throughout the body. This is what normal red blood cells look like. It's a round disc with a little indentation in there, but it's a nice, healthy round disc. When those hemoglobins have this mutation of one amino acid difference, these sickle cells will clump up in the blood, and this does not allow for the blood to flow normally through tiny openings in the spleen or other organs. End result of the disease is low oxygen, low blood supply, and anemia. The definition of anemia is low blood supply to various parts of the body. Because sickle cell anemia is an example of a disease that results from just one nucleotide base change in DNA resulting in the wrong amino acid, it goes back to noting these triplet codons. If you change 1 or 2 bases, for example, this is GTA, this triplet codon codes for the amino acid histidine. Well, if this is changed to the G and T, just 2 bases, to 2 A's, well, you're going to have a different amino acid that's brought in, phenylalanine instead, if this becomes AAA instead of GTA. So it's really important in DNA replication to make 100% exactly the same copy every single time. This is achieved with enzymes. They speed up the process, and they also make corrections to the replicated DNA. Sickle cell anemia is one of them, where just changing a single nucleotide can change the amino acid and then affect the structure and the function of the protein. Where sickle cell anemia is an example of an inherited disease, and you might not have inherited sickle cell anemia, well, what is important in this idea that one amino acid change, going back to one nucleotide base change in the DNA, where that affects all of us, is exposure to what's called ionizing radiation. So this is the electromagnetic spectrum. We've seen this before. There's all the types of energy that radiate as a wave. On the lower energy side, there's radio waves, microwaves, infrared, and visible. That's all non-ionizing. It doesn't do any damage, but higher energy, which includes UV, X-rays, and gamma rays, that's called ionizing radiation. You are exposed to if you are exposed to radiation from the doctor's office, or smoking, or UV from sunlight. What ionizing radiation does is it causes mutations in your DNA. And mutations
accumulate over the course of years or decades of exposure to any of these higher energy electromagnetic radiation. These mutations can provide cells that have new properties like hyperactive growth leading to tumors and cancer.